I'm glad to be with you. Again, it's been a little while since I've seen a lot of your faces, and it's nice to see you this evening. Thanks for coming out. I hope that the things that we'll talk about tonight will be helpful to you, beneficial, and at the same time enrich your life. I wish that I could see the stories in the Bible for the first time as an adult. I learned many of those when I was a child. I heard those Bible stories in classes, and I learned the facts of the story, but I didn't learn all the details, and then those made themselves apparent little by little so that the overall impact of the story doesn't have that big wow moment that it might have if maybe for the very first time I had heard some of the stories that my teachers told me when I was a little boy in Bible class. So when I was a boy, I thought Jacob was a good guy. And it was only after I grew up that I came to realize he's a dog. I mean, Jacob in his early life is a despicable character. No self-respecting father would be thrilled to have that schemer propose marriage to his daughter. I mean, think about it. From birth, he is constantly attempting to usurp his brother's place in the family. He comes out of the womb called Tripper. I mean, his name is, he's the schemer. And that's really what his name means. He's not just the usurper. It's not that word. Think in terms of somebody who is constantly trying to trip the person in front of them so they can get ahead of them. You probably had people like that in school. I was one of those. That walked behind other people, and every time they tried to put a foot forward, they were catching it because you were popping the back of their foot the whole time. Tripper. That's what he is. He's the usurper. And he's that way from his early childhood. So he becomes mama's boy while Esau becomes his dad's favorite. And then in a moment where Esau is most vulnerable, he gets the birthright from him. And he buys it from his brother, and he isn't even willing to pay a decent price for that. I mean, it's a bowl of stew. It's like a lentil soup. It's the last one you would choose at Olive Garden. And he gets the birthright because his brother says, whether right or wrong, and there's a sense in which he may very well have been speaking exaggeratedly, but he says, I'm dying. What good is it going to do me to have my birthright if I'm dead? So yeah, I'll sell it to you. Sell it to you. I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, feed me. No, what's the price? That's Jacob. And then he takes advantage of his father in his old age when he can't hear very well, he can't see much of anything, and his sense of smell is the only thing he's got left. Proof that Isaac never had COVID, because he can smell. And it's then that this Jacob and his mother planned this incredible subterfuge to go in there and pretend to be Esau. Dresses up like him, puts fur on the back of his hands so that he'll be hairy like him, wears his clothes because he's got Ode Esau all over it, and then tries to assume the place of his brother to receive the blessing that was reserved for the oldest son, his father's favorite, the hunter. So he steals it. And it's no wonder that finally Esau is fed up with it, He's tired of his sneaky ways. And he says out loud, when Dad is dead, I'm killing Jacob. I mean, that's how worthless Esau considered him to be. I will kill him when Dad is gone. Well, their mother hears that and makes a decision. I've got to send him away. So he goes into a far country, I mean a distant country, goes back to the relatives of his mother's family. And that's where he meets the woman of his dreams and her sister. And there are things that happen to him, but they're not far different than the things he did earlier in his life. And we almost come away from that story saying he's getting his just desserts. He should have the great switcheroo. You want Rachel, I'll give you Leah. And she disguises herself in such a way that he thinks he is marrying the woman of his dreams, only to find out it's not her. But then Laban says, oh, don't worry, almost reminiscent of Jacob when Esau is in trouble, saying, yeah, I'll sell it to you. Laban, instead of saying, oh, yeah, I know I shouldn't have done that, but I'll tell you what, we got a BOGO going right now. And so you get both of them. You buy one, Leah, you get one, Rachel. No, he says, no, you can have Rachel, don't worry, you get her. Work 7 more years. Now, to his credit, he does that. And I would have to say, probably he reminded Rachel of that very often, how much she meant to him to have worked for her that long. But he can't live with Laban. It's two guys that are way too much alike. Two poker players that won't back down, betting everything they have that they can beat the other guy. And they finally get fed up with that, and with his wife's encouragement, they say, let's vacate this place. And we'll go back home. Back home. His father's dead. His mother's dead. The only one back home is Esau. Esau, I'm going to kill him when Dad dies, his brother. So Jacob prepares to go home. And now that is a fascinating story, and there is much about that story that we could probably key on. There's much of that I love preaching on. His encounter in Genesis chapter 32 with the angels that meet him along the way. I have no earthly idea what is happening in chapter 32 when he went on his way and the angels of God met him and he said, this is God's camp. So he named the place Mahanaim. I don't know what the angels did. I don't know what they provided. Maybe just that God is with him. And that's, I don't mean to use the word just as to lighten that, but that God's there. His angels are here. Almost reminiscent of the angels who appear for Jesus in the worst times of his life. When Satan tempts him in the wilderness and the angels came and ministered to him. And on the night before his death, when an angel appears and comforts him. God's way of saying, they're here. Now, I don't want to get too many tangential points here, but I will tell you, angels aren't always, they're not always ethereal creatures. They're all heavenly creatures. The angels are the ones who serve God's purpose, but sometimes we're angels serving God's purposes. I do not believe that Hebrews chapter 13, when it says that we're to not neglect showing hospitality to strangers, for by doing so some have entertained angels without knowing it, unawares. I don't believe that's just heavenly ethereal angels. I think sometimes they're heavenly earthly angels. And we're not even always aware that we're entertaining God's messengers. But I want to tell you, we need to be those messengers. And there are times when people are in distress, and what we need to do is be God's angels, to rally to them. Maybe with no other purpose than just to sit and moan with those who moan, and comfort those who are in distress. So Jacob sees the angels, and then he goes on his way. It says in verse 3, he sent messengers before him to his brother, who's in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, which sits on the edge of the land of Canaan, where Jacob had grown up. And he says, "You'll say this to my lord Esau, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now." Verse 5, "I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male and female servants. I've sent to tell my Lord that I may find favor in your sight." So the messengers go to Esau to say, your brother's coming, and he wants to find favor with you. He's here to make peace with you. That's his great desire. Now, Jacob doesn't have a moral position of power. There is nothing he can offer to Esau that says, you ought to accept me back. He's just appealing to him. I'm coming. I hope we can make peace. And then the messengers come back. Verse 6. "We came to your brother Esau, and he's coming to meet you." Now, he's coming to meet you, if that was all that was said, would probably bring comfort to Jacob. Oh, great, he's coming. But then come these words, "and he's bringing 400 men with him." Now, I have to tell you, if you think that's a welcoming party, you don't understand the times. That is an execution. That is not an execution party. That's a slaughter party. 400 men. I mean, even if Jacob had a household army, they don't come close to what Esau is bringing. Here comes Esau and his cavalry. And it is right that Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He's not misreading the scene. He knows Esau is coming to fulfill what he said when Jacob stole the blessing from him. When Dad is dead, I will kill you. And now he's coming. 400 men. So Jacob sets up this really elaborate way of trying to appease Esau. And I'm not going into a lot of detail about it, but first he divides everything he's got into two companies. They're apart, far enough apart from each other, splitting his household, all of the people he's got, his wives and their children and servants that Laban may have given him. He says, y'all go far enough that way that there's no way Esau can see you. And if he sees the dust of one of the companies, hopefully he'll attack it. Think that's all there is. He'll wipe them out, clean the blood off his swords, sheathe them, and go back home. At least half of us will make it. I mean, that's how pessimistic Jacob is about what's going to happen. And then he does this. He says, praying to God, deliver me from the hand of my brother, For I fear him that he'll come and attack me and the mothers with the children. And then he reminds God, you said, I will prosper you, and I'll make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered. He's saying, hey, God, I'm just reminding you, you said you'd take care of me. There's a guy coming with 400 men who deny that. You said, I'm calling this one in. So he spent the night there. And he selected from what he had with him, listen, this is really interesting, a present for his brother Esau. But I'm going into this real quickly because I want to get to the main part of the story. It's not a present. It's like one present that has like 15 or 20 boxes inside it, all wrapped up, all to be opened individually. One big box, but lots of presents inside. So what he sends him is 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. And what he does is he lines them up in their individual sections that I just named them. So he will take the 200 female goats and 20 male goats, and one servant will take them and march them into Esau's presence. And the others are queued up. They're in the back. Like, you stay back, stay back. Okay, send the goats. And the goats come into the presence of Esau, and they're all told to say, when he asks you, to whom do you belong and where are you going? And to whom do these animals in front of you belong? Say, these belong to your servant Jacob. It's a present sent to my lord Esau, and he's behind us. And then the next will come, the second, the third, and all those who followed. So Esau's, let's say Esau's back there where the fire extinguisher is, and these groups are coming one after another up to Esau. He's got 400 men all on their horses, snorting, pawing the ground, waiting, getting ready to pull swords. This is going to be fun. And one after another, they come up to him and they bring, this is yours, this is yours, this is yours. And I think what Jacob's doing is playing a mind game with Esau. Let's say Esau's really mad still at the first one. But then he gets present number 2. And then he gets present number 3. And then number 4. And then number 5. Now the person who's missing from this story in the presence of that group is Esau's wife. Because she would be saying, where are we going to put all this? One after another they come. One after another they come. And while that is all set up, that this is how we're going to do that tomorrow, Jacob has that remarkable encounter with the Lord where he wrestles with him all night long. I would love to tell you more about that story, but that's going to delay us from where I want to be. I want to go to chapter 33, and we begin in verse 1. So Jacob lifted up his eyes, and he looked, and behold, Esau was coming. And 400 men with him. So here's what he does now. Now, all that has been done, one present after another, to try to soften the brow of Esau, to kind of loosen him up a little bit. Oh, that's a great gift, but I'm still mad. Oh, that's a great gift, but I'm still peeved. Oh, that's a great gift. Maybe he's all right. One after another after another. But then, just in case Esau's still really upset, maybe his anger will be renewed when he sees the face of his brother, Jacob does this. It says he put the maids and their children in front, Bilhah and Zilpah, the concubines, and their children in front. Now, I got to tell you, we talk sometimes about building self-esteem in our children. He's not doing that very well here. Gad says, why am I in front? Well, he may start killing. You're the first one to go. Maybe by the time he gets back to the favorites, he'll be tired. So the maids go in front with their children, and then it says he put Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. But he himself passed on ahead of them. And then I want you to get this. And he bowed to the ground 7 times. So I want you to picture this. He's moving toward Esau. He's in front. His maids are behind him. Leah is behind that. Leah's got her 4 children, 6 children, all lined up behind her. Stay behind me, kids. And in the very back is Rachel with little Joseph. And he's in the very back. And Jacob moves toward Esau. And he takes a few steps. And then he gets down. And he bows all the way to the ground. And then he gets up. And then he moves forward a few steps. And he bows all the way to the ground. And he gets up. And he moves forward a few more steps. And he bows all the way to the ground. And he gets up. And he moves forward and he bows. 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 And I know you're saying, we get it. We got it. But you need to understand that repetition of words that I just gave you was acted out by him. 7 times. That great biblical number 7, that number of perfection, Jacob acts out in front of his brother. In bowing down to the ground, he is lowering himself before his brother. He is making himself vulnerable. He is offering himself to his brother. 7 times he does that. And then comes verse 4. We're waiting to see what happens. 7 bows. The family coming behind him, halting each time, waiting, halting. And verse 4 says, then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Mark that verse. That's an incredible verse. You see Esau, proud soldier, sitting on that back of that horse, sitting there with 400 men with bloodlust in their eyes. We've come for the killing ground. And this is the guy we're going to take out. Him and all his behind him. We'll take the gifts, but we want Jacob. And he will die because my father is now dead. And by Jacob, first, having prayed to God, second, having wrestled with God for his favor, has by his prayers turned the heart of Esau. But it is only after he comes toward Esau. Esau doesn't run to him as soon as he sees him. Jacob, get over here, give me a big hug. It is only after he has physically demonstrated his subservience to his brother that Esau dismounts, runs to his brother, embraces his brother, fell on his neck, and kissed him. And then they both break down, weeping. What a scene. I mean, if that were a movie, that's where the music really goes nuts. That's when everybody in the audience goes, oh, this is wonderful. But I want to read that for you again, and I want you to think, have you heard this language before? He ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. Have you heard that language before? Some of you are nodding your heads. You know where you've heard it? The greatest short story in the history of the written word. Luke chapter 15. In Luke chapter 15, there's another man who has messed up his life by decisions that he's made. Selfishly pursued what he wanted in life and didn't think about anybody else. Infuriated his brother, and we don't know if they ever reconciled. We don't know. But certainly dishonored his father and his father's wishes. In fact, we could say he stole from his father, because what he starts out saying is, I'd like the part of the inheritance that falls to me. The father gives it to him, and then he cuts and runs. You seeing any similarities between Jacob and the man we call the prodigal son? And why did he do what he did? Because he wanted for himself. It was all about him. So he leaves behind a grieving father and an angry older brother who may very well at some point have said, what he's done to Dad is so despicable, if I ever get my hands on him, I'll kill him. I'll at least wring his neck. And the father is grieved sorely by his son's profligate ways. Unwilling to submit to the structure of his family and the authority that was in his home, he cheats the system and leaves to become his own boss. And he failed miserably. He's not different from Jacob. He wants it his way, and he wants whatever he can get out of life for himself. And then he turned his heart toward home, like Jacob. Now, there's no question, they're not parallels in every way. Jacob comes a pretty wealthy guy. I mean, he's got sheep to give away and goats to give away and cows to give away and mules to give away and all kinds of things that he has. And he's got a whole family intact behind him. The prodigal comes home with nothing. He is hungry. He is barefoot. His clothes are tattered. He smells of the pig pen. He comes home an abject failure. But in other respects, they're very similar. I want to come home, but I can't come home unless I subject myself to the power and authority of that home. So for Jacob, it's bowing 7 times to say to Esau, you're my master. For the prodigal son, it is coming, rehearsing this speech. Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me a hireling. Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me a hireling. And when his father comes in Luke chapter 15, that is the very speech that he tries to give to his father. In verse 18, I will get up and I will go to my father and I will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. So he got up and came to his father. But now listen. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him. And now the wording, and ran and embraced and kissed him. There's a lot of things we could say about Esau and the father in the story of Luke chapter 15 that would not make them parallels, but contrasts. The father wasn't coming to meet the son with the desire to kill him like Esau was coming to Jacob. Esau's a profane man, the book of Hebrews tells us. But in this case, he offers to Jacob what the father offers to his son: undeserved reconciliation. Jacob doesn't deserve that. Jacob does not deserve to have Esau forgive him for everything he's done to him. He's made his life a different life than it ever should have been. Esau was the oldest son. Esau should have had the blessing. Esau should have had the birthright. And Jacob stole that. So Esau offers to Jacob not what Jacob deserves, but the mercy and grace that Jacob receives. And the prodigal son, in much the same way, does not deserve what the father gives him. The father saw him, ran to meet him as Esau ran, embraced this smelly, dirty waif of a son, emaciated because of starvation, who has ruined his life, the older brother says, and the father never denies it, with prostitutes and partying. The father embraces him and kisses him. Now here is a difference. The word here for kissed him is the word for kissing repeatedly. It's not just the word for one. My dad's mother lived in Fort Meade. My grandfather and grandmother were there, and whenever we went to Fort Meade to visit, we would drive up into the driveway, and my grandmother would come out on the back porch, and she always had an apron on, and I don't know, her hands were always wet because she was always wiping them on the front of the apron. And my mother would give these instructions to my sister and me: go hug your grandma. We didn't want to do that, not because we didn't like her, but because my grandmother would grab us by the head and she would plant big, wet, sloppy kisses all over our heads, all over. Face, eyes, nose, mouth. And if my sister got it first, I only saw what was awaiting me, which made it worse. I'll go first. Every time I see this story and I read these words that he kissed him, and the implication is repeatedly, I see a father who is so overtaken with love for his son, he can't stop kissing him. There's not a word here that they wept together, but you and I know there's no way that story could happen without tears. The father ran to meet him, embraced him, kissed him repeatedly, and welcomed him back. Okay, I want to go one more step. Does that sound familiar to you personally? Because I was there. I sought my own way. I thought I knew how to live. And I took blessings that God gave me and used them for my own purposes. And one day I realized I needed to come home. And when I came to my Father and to my Savior, Jesus Christ, they, in their own way, ran to meet me. They embraced me. They kissed me repeatedly. And we wept. I was lost, and I was alone, and I had created pain for my life, and I couldn't repair the damage, and I deserved only the wrath of God. But Romans chapter 5 states my condition and yours. While we were still helpless, verse 6 says, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For one will hardly die for a righteous man, though perhaps for the good man someone would dare even to die. But God demonstrates his own love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And much more than being justified by his blood, we shall be saved from the wrath of God through him. For if, while we were enemies, like Jacob was, like the prodigal was, we were reconciled to God, who ran to us and embraced us and kissed us repeatedly. Through the death of his Son, much more, having been reconciled, we shall be saved by his life. And not only this, but we also, listen to the word, exult in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received the reconciliation. It's a great story, this Genesis 33. It's as if God put that there and said, remember this, because you're going to see it again. And then Jesus gave his version of it, his version of the Jacob-Esau story. And then really said to us, you're going to see it again. And each one of us has. Each one of us who is the prodigal God has called, who's returned and bowed low 7 times, bringing whatever we have and giving it to God. Whether it's the mess we've made of our lives or the successes that have been ours, we give it to God, who runs to meet us, embraces us, and kisses us to welcome us home. Pray with me. Lord, my heart is filled this evening with a sense of inadequacy, mostly incapable of describing fully your grace and your mercy toward us. But so appreciative and grateful that you have come to us and embraced us and kissed us and welcomed us home. That you have killed not a fattened calf, but your only begotten Son, and made him the one who died in our place. You have been better to us than we deserve. And we wear proudly your signet ring that identifies us as yours. And we wear the robes that you have put on us that are spotless and white when we only sullied them in our sins. And we wear the sandals you put on our feet so that we may take the gospel not only to our families and our churches, but to others. May this story that was acted out in Jacob and Esau's life and was told in the parable Jesus offered to us be replayed daily in this world as people come to you because they have seen Christ living in us. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for the story. Thank you for this time that we could meditate on it and appreciate it in a new way. We are grateful recipients of the grace that you offer us through Jesus Christ our Lord. And all God's disciples said, Amen.